monthly lectures, as well as some other talks that we are finding around the world and putting up there. In fact, I'm doing an online Zoom talk next month. I'll put the link up myself for the Pictish Arts Society in Scotland, which I'm hoping they record, because otherwise you would all have to join me at 2 a.m. to watch me do it. But I think they're going to record it. You could probably watch it later if you're interested. But we'll put things like that there time to time for folks who are interested. Okay. If you've missed a lecture in the past, a lot of our speakers have generously allowed us to video their lectures, or if you can't get enough of how good they are, you can go back and rewatch them. And tonight's speaker has generously allowed us to record her lecture, so it will be up on our YouTube channel shortly. We are still on Facebook while it still exists, and is still a place that we will advertise all of our talks. So you can check us out on our website. You can check us out on Facebook. You can also check us out in our electronic newsletter. Our newsletter for the spring will be appearing in your inboxes shortly. Thanks as always to the work of Dr. Rachel Horowitz on our board, who has done the whole newsletter and is waiting for the From the President remarks from me. So that's why there's a bit of a delay, but that should be appearing pretty quickly in your email inboxes. If you want to be included, if you don't have that, let us know and we can email that out to you. We also tend to print out some of those, thanks to the Mac, and bring them to some of the meetings. And they have a lot of information about our upcoming lectures, as well as what else we're doing as a society. So speaking of what's coming up, we have 2 more speakers this year. After tonight's talk, Dr. Tekla Schmaus from Washington State University will be coming in March. And then Dr. Scott Pike, who was coming in January, has graciously rescheduled thanks to the ice storms that hit the Willamette Valley last month, kind of kept him from getting out of Salem area. He will be coming in April to give that talk, which we're really happy that he's able to come back so soon. Before I begin, our board would like to acknowledge, we would like to honor the original people of the lands on which we stand by recognizing this as the traditional homeland territory of the Spokane tribe. They're present here since time immemorial, can be seen and felt within these museum walls and in the surrounding landscapes. With gratitude, we'd like to extend a thank you to the Spokanes, past, present, and future, for sharing this space as a place for artistic and cultural expressions to be enjoyed by all. Now, although this is getting recorded, it is a live presentation, and please do not record it yourself. It's strictly prohibited. The IA respects the intellectual property of its presenters and asks the viewers to do the same. Thank you for your cooperation on that. So tonight's talk is thanks to the Frederick and Margaret Matson lecture series. They've sponsored this talk, our speaker this evening. And sorry, I'm just realizing I'm missing a slide. That's not good. But in Near Eastern archaeology and archaeological technology. And they were established by a generous gift from the professors Matson, who are lifelong friends of the Institute. A past president of the AIA, serving from 1975 to 76, Frederick Matson served as the professor emeritus at Pennsylvania State University, where he had a long and illustrious career in the anthropology department. And Margaret Matson was also at Penn State. And just coincidentally, I'm from Pennsylvania, so I'm always happy to kind of flag up that. And I actually have a degree from Penn State, so yay. They retired from the sociology department and shared her husband's interest in Near Eastern archaeology and the work of the Institute. So, my whole slide introducing my speaker is not here, so I'm going to have to do this from memory. That's okay. I'm really pleased to introduce Dr. Rhodora Vennarucci from the University of Arkansas, who will be talking to us tonight on Socci and sociability, shopping for status in a Roman shop. Dr. Vennarucci, if I remember right from my notes, has had a variety of excavation projects across Italy. Some of the things I'm really quite interested in is not just the excavation work that she co-leads south of Tuscany. I cannot remember the site, my apologies. But also it has a really fascinating public education and outreach with virtual reality and kind of recreating the past in a variety of digital settings. So please welcome our speaker this evening. They'll be talking about Socci and sociability, shopping for status in a Roman shop.
Let me just pull up my notes. And while I'm doing that, let me start off by thanking the Spokane AIA Society for inviting me here to share my research tonight. Brian and Marion and Cindy and Amanda for getting me set up, and Andy and Amy for hosting me generously, and Spokane for giving me a winter wonderland welcome for my visit. It was 70 degrees in Arkansas yesterday. I know. Oh, I'll take it with me. Okay. I'm sure they'll love that. All right. So let me jump in here. And I'm talking to you today about ancient Roman retail. So Barbara Kruger's "I shop, therefore I am" sardonically reflects the vital relationship between shopping as a cultural phenomenon and identity formation in our own society. And I suspect everyone in this room is a shopper in some way, shape, or form. So it may surprise you to learn that it was not until the late 20th century that marketing scholars like Miller, quoted here, began to really view shopping as meaningful social action. In fact, many scholars still today deny that shopping as a complex social cultural practice existed in pre-industrial societies like Rome. Instead, shopping behavior has historically been viewed as a hallmark of modern, or if you ask Blondet and Van Dam, early modern retailing. And part of their argument in a simplified sort of form is the term shopping doesn't appear in the OED until the 18th century. Partly because of this entrenched view, and partly because of larger trajectories in archaeological theory and practice, quantitative approaches have dominated studies of Roman consumption over qualitative and phenomenological or experiential ones. Traditional focus has been on the objects consumed in their context of use and discard, which are used as metrics or proxies for consumer behavior and identity. So let me see if I can get my laser up here. Oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. There we go. Okay, so when I'm talking about the object consumed in its place, context of use or discard, what I'm talking about here is these pair of slippers, which appear under a dining couch in a Roman triclinium. Now, these studies have helped us understand practices and patterns, but they've entirely overlooked the crucial first steps in construction, which is acquisition in a commercial context. And that's what this central fresco is showing you. From a different angle, we look here, scholarship on ancient retail has typologized and traced the evolution of shop architecture, but shops are more than empty architectural halls. They are social artifacts, products of human behavior that store collective memory. And they are also, as you can see again, represented here in the central fresco, sociable spaces where interactions between objects and people in people were mediated through the senses to shape power, status, and identity. And there have been studies that show, for instance, even in the age of online retail, that the majority of people, when surveyed, still prefer to shop in person in a shop because of these social experiential aspects. Maybe that resonates with you. So we need to re-embody the Roman shop if we want to approach it as social infrastructure, and my presentation today attempts to do just that by examining how Roman consumers may have performed status by shopping for slippers in the felt shop of Verecundus at Pompeii. But before we can jump into that, we need to go back to this original question. Did ancient Romans actually shop? If you were to ask Dorothy Davis, who published A History of Shopping in 2006, her answer would be no. If you were to ask Stobart and Howard, who published the Routledge Companion to the History of Retail in 2018, also no. These volumes, very influential and important, do not go further back than the medieval period. Harlow and Lawrence's A Cultural History of Shopping in Antiquity, published in 2022, is the first monograph to address this topic. 2022. I, of course, have been answering yes to this question since 2015. And my research has shown that between the mid-Republican and early imperial periods, the rise of shop economies in towns around Roman Italy caused a shift in consumer behavior from functional buying, I'm hungry, I buy bread, to shopping as a leisure activity imbued with social cultural signifiers. I'm bored, I want to go to Target, right? Indirect references in the textual sources support my argument, and I'm going to show you two of my favorite examples. The first is from the Roman poet Propertius, who in his elegy gives us a familiar sexist trope, complaining in this elegy about his girlfriend Cynthia, who demands luxurious gifts from her lover. She is not content, however, by just any pretty bauble, but she wants the goodies sold in the luxury shops that we know also from epigraphic evidence clustered around the Via Sacra that ran through the Roman Forum. Here it seems to me that where you were seen to purchase your crystal balls and ivory dice was now a signifier of product quality, not just any ivory dice, the one from the Via Sacra, and consumer trendiness and status. I got my ivory dice from the Via Sacra. And I'll add that in the late Republic and Imperial period, this clustering of luxury shops, pearl shops, goldsmiths, jewelers, silk shops, etc., cosmetic shops, made the Via Sacra in the Forum a sort of high street or main street. And since it ran through the Roman Forum, anyone shopping in these spaces would have been highly visible. My next example comes from Martial, who's writing in the 1st century AD. And in this epigram, he's talking about the Septa, which had recently been reconstructed by Domitian after it had burned down in the fire of 80 CE. And Domitian transformed the Septa into a lavishly adorned luxury goods market. I'm going to read a portion of this poem for you, and I want you to think about what it represents or what it's echoing or reflecting about shopping behavior in this period. Strolling long and often in the Septa, where golden Rome rummages among her wealth, Mamurra, whom scholars identify as a freedman, inspected tender boys, devouring them with his eyes. Not the ones exposed in the booths in front, no, but those kept in reserve in private rooms, not seen by the public and common folk like me. Satiated with looking, he stripped the coverings off round tabletops and demanded the oiled ivory displayed on high shelves. After 4 times measuring a tortoiseshell couch for 6, complained it was not large enough for his citrus table. He inquired of his nostrils whether the bronzes really smelt of Corinth. And Polycletus, he was critical of your statues. And he goes on and on, I'm going to skip to the last 2 lines, until finally, left tired out at the 11th hour, he bought 2 wine cups for a copper penny and carried them home himself. This poem depicts Mamurra engaging in otium, leisure, by essentially window shopping his way through the Septa. And his ostentatious self-display for shopping for these luxury goods suggest again to me that where a person was seen to shop in the city, how they acquired their goods, and yes, what they eventually purchased or didn't, had become important signifiers of socioeconomic status. Now, we're going to revisit this passage in Mamurra at the end of my talk, so I want you to keep him in the back of your mind as I move forward. What I hope to have shown with these 2 examples is that shopping behavior did exist in ancient Rome. But here's the challenge. How do we study ancient consumer experience and behavior when all of our ancient Roman consumers are, to be blunt, dead? How do we do it? We turn to the shops. And the shops themselves, found in thousands in towns across the Mediterranean, are our best data set for exploring shopping practices. And the way we do this is through something I've coined reverse retail atmospherics. By studying the shop layout and its design, we can recover some of the environmental stimuli, such as lighting, smells, sounds, layout, color, and decor that marketing research confirms has a huge impact on consumer behavior. In marketing, retail atmospherics is how shopkeepers design shops with these environmental stimuli in mind in order to influence consumers to buy. We can see a modern example of this in the Abercrombie and Fitch store. So if you've ever visited an American shopping mall, you've probably been exposed to this experience, whether or not you've gone inside. Abercrombie and Fitch is known for pumping perfume through its vents, playing loud club music, keeping its interior very dimly lit. And all of those environmental decisions are to attract a youthful consumer group, which is definitely not me. So these aspects create avoidance behavior in myself and send me to the other side of the shopping mall. But for some, they pull them in, promising a hip shopping experience for your textiles. Before the Industrial Revolution and advent of mass marketing, a consumer's sensorial perceptions of a shop's environment were critical factors in shaping consumer behavior. Engaging the senses through the ancient shop is also what made shopping a pleasurable pastime for some. That's not pleasurable for me. And as we saw in Marshall's epigram with Mamura, this pleasurable pastime was not restricted to elite groups in society. Exploration of the physical remains of Roman shops is a challenge. There's lots of challenges stacking up here. This felt shop of Verecundus was only partially excavated and then reconstructed by Spinazzola and his team in the early 20th century. The facade decor was badly damaged, left exposed to the elements for most of the 20th century, and finally stripped from the shop front and removed to storage. If I could right now put us all on a plane and fly us to Pompeii so that we could stand on the Via della Madanza in front of the felt shop of Verecundus, it would still be hard for us to visualize how it might have appeared to consumers when it was in use. So this is where my virtual Roman retail project comes in. This project uses an interdisciplinary approach that combines virtual archaeology, consumer culture theory, sensory archaeology, and principles of archaeogaming to design interactive 3D visualizations of Roman shops that are helping us unlock new understanding about the embodied experiences of ancient consumers. This project is designed in 3 phases, and we are getting close in the next few months to releasing the beta version of our Pompeii application on the Meta App Lab store for free download. So if you have a Meta VR headset, you can access this. We collected 3D modeling photogrammetry data at Ostia for the so-called fish shops, and we are in the process of designing a second interactive scene for the Ostia shops. And we have plans to go to Tunisia in the future to record Romano-African shops, and we'll produce a third interactive scene for the VR application. The idea here is to create a comparative library of Roman shops in different chronological periods in different towns around the empire so that we can begin to explore the subtle differences in the way that shops were shaping Romano-African, Ostian, Pompeian commercial experiences. So you'll have to stay tuned and follow us for the other interactive scenes. Our shops, which we design in the Unity 3D game engine for use, as I mentioned, on the MetaQuest head site, are grounded in the archaeological and historical records, and they incorporate 3D models. But we are not concerned with hyperfidelity, nor do we attempt to recover exactly what a Roman consumer would have experienced in this shop space. That's impossible. And even if we can do it, the Roman experience is not a monolith. Reconstructing one Roman's experience in the shop does not help us understand the diversity of experiences that existed in the ancient Roman world. Instead, we use modern hybrid digital physical bodies as proxies for the past bodies to explore faithful but abstracted visualizations of ancient shops in a sensorially meaningful way. And if there's time at the end and you're brave or curious, I have my Oculus headset here, and you can be transported to the shop in Pompeii and try out this application for yourself. Why this shop? Why the felt shop of Verecundus? Why did we start here? My choice is in part due to my personal interest in the Roman textile industry, and this is a textile shop, but it was also informed by its retail geography. This shop is located on the northern side of the Via dell'Abbondanza, Pompeii's most integrated, heavily trafficked street with the highest density of shops and most street activity. This one block of the Via dell'Abbondanza has 8 shop spaces, including 2 textile shops, 1 dye shop, and across the street, the famous Filonica of Stephanos. This clustering of textile shops and workshops allows us, if we were to design out the VR application to include the rest of the block, to address questions of retail competition between these spaces. The facade decor, which is no longer in situ, as I mentioned, has been removed to storage, but the facade decor also has a lot of rich detail that lets us situate the shop's commercial activities within a specific social historical context in the late 70s, or in the 70s CE, I should say. I don't want to restrict it to the late. We can identify, for instance, the symbolic meaning of the objects and images in the decor to say something about the religiosity of the shop owner. We can also identify the shopkeeper's gender, and I'll point her out. She's here behind the counter. And we may be able to say something about her status. Scholars who studied this art suggest that she's the wife of the shop owner, which is possible, but most agree that she likely was a freed woman, a formerly enslaved woman. She may even be the Cocula, her name, mentioned in an election notice found on the facade. And that election notice dates to 76-79 CE. We can also identify the shop owner on the facade, who conveniently gives us his name under his image. Here he is, Verecundus, whom scholars also believe was a freedman of freedman status. Behind Verecundus, a scene depicts felt workers at work, suggesting that the products sold in this shop were locally produced, or at least some of them. And an election notice carefully positioned between the enslaved felt workers tells us that the coauxiliari, the felt workers, ask Rogant that you elect Vettius Firmus as aedile, one of the town magistrates. And we can date that electoral programmata to 71-75 CE. So we can say that this shop was likely still in use in the last decade before Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried it. Most important for what I want to talk about today, the facade decor gives us some more specific details about what was sold in this shop. So felt of some sort, but if we look more closely, we can say that they were dealing in high-end textiles, ones that denoted status, like the toga praetexta, which was worn by elected officials. And this is held out in Verecundus's hand and maybe folded up in piles on the shop counter. We also know from a graffito that the shop sold tunica lentea aurata, tunics of woven linen with gold thread. So very fancy. But the star of tonight's show are these items, front and center on the shop counter, held in both hands of the shopkeeper and found on the feet of the shop owner. Slippers, felted slippers. Felted slippers, according to our textual sources, were imported first from Greece and were worn by comedic actors on the stage. And we can see, in fact, from the mosaic of the Sorceress from the Villa of Cicero, just outside Pompeii, a scene of actors wearing theater masks and wearing yellow Socci, or felted slippers. Once the slippers arrived in Italy, they became associated with Roman women. And so we know from Catullus, for instance, writing in the 1st century BCE, that the luteum socum, the yellow slipper, was part of the Roman bridal ensemble. We hear from Pliny, writing in the 1st century CE, he died in the volcanic eruption of Vesuvius, that nay, even more than this, Roman women put pearls on their feet, and then not only on the laces of their sandals, but all over their soculis, their slippers. For it is not enough to wear pearls, but they must tread upon them and walk with them underfoot as well. There is a clear moralizing tone here in Pliny, but this passage underscores the fact that these slippers were connected to luxury and fashion. And if we turn to the price edict of Diocletian, which was issued in 301 CE, we can see that link between slippers and luxury underscored. The price edict, there's a number of caveats on how we work with this, but it listed maximum prices for footwear, including Socci and solii, 2 different types of woolen slippers. And the prices range from 50 to 120 denarii. If we accept that 1 denarius, a silver coin, was equivalent to the day's wage for a laborer in Roman society, a denarius might roughly be converted to a $100 bill in today's society. So that would mean that the maximum prices for these particular slippers ranged from $5,000 to $12,000 a pair. I will restate that these are maximum prices. They could be sold for much less, but just in case you're thinking, who would pay $12,000 for a pair of slippers? I did a search for expensive shoe brands in 2024 and found that a Manolo Blahnik will cost you $4,600, and that a pair of Louis Vuitton is upward of $10,000, and those aren't even the most expensive ones. So people today and back then were willing to spend money on their slippers. Let me emphasize here, because maybe you're thinking, why did I come out in the snow to learn about slippers? Slippers are non-functional shoes. You can't wear them outside. You can't wear them in the mucky streets of Pompeii. You can't travel in them. You can't work in them. Slippers were designed to be worn indoors. And according to the textual and art historical evidence, they were closely associated with leisure, wealth, and specifically elite dining context. So again, if we now turn to the solii, and we see Marshall appear again, talking about dining slippers. If your enslaved person should happen to be absent and you wish to get your slippers, try a pair. They will enable your feet to serve themselves. And what strikes me about this epigram is that this fresco from Pompeii, from the house of the Triclinium, showing a Roman dining party, seems to visualize, there's no direct link, of course, but seems to visualize Marshall's sentiment. Here we have a diminutive enslaved person bending down and either putting on or taking off the dining slippers of this elite guest. In another epigram from Marshall, he warns his readers about the social pest, Menegenes, who, although he's already bathed and already has his dining slippers on, ready to go to dinner, he will still scrounge for your ball in the dirt in the baths, hoping to get an invitation to your dinner party. This same image is repeated by Petronius in the Satyricon when we first meet the character Trimalchio, a freedman, a bougie, very wealthy freedman, who also appears playing ball in his dining slippers in the baths. Now, the passage not only links slippers to dining, these 2 passages, but they also tell us that footwear for the discerning Roman was not meant to be worn outside the home, only inside. And it was very gauche to wear your dining slippers to the baths. One final example here to convince you. the tomb of the aedile, Gaius Vestorius Priscus, who was interred some point 75, 76 CE outside the walls of Pompeii. The interior walls of Priscus's tomb were decorated with symbols of his status and his office. And on the west wall of his tomb, we see Priscus himself wearing what looks to be, here's Priscus, a toga praetexta, symbol of his office as aedile, entering a room in, we assume, his house, where an enslaved attendant waits on hand to serve. The room is furnished with 2 wooden couches, 2 side tables, and these pieces of furniture are littered with writing tablets, scrolls, a capsa, a scroll case, and money. Can't forget about the money. And tucked underneath one of those couches, right there, his dining slippers. Perhaps these slippers foreshadow the extravagant dinner party depicted on the south wall of his tomb that can only begin once the aedile's heavy business of the day has ended. In this fresco, we see how clothing, here the toga praetexta and the slippers, are expressing prestige and social rank of the wearer through generally accepted and recognizable symbolism. In Roman society, textiles were not just functional items of clothing or objects of economic exchange. They were objects to think with, to speak with, to construct meaning with, as we use them today. The problem for me is that looking is what makes that meaning. It is the power of being seen in the toga praetexta or the slippers that is the means of communicating the status, the identity, the fashionability, the affluence of the wearer. And it's through the seeing of those objects that one inserts themselves into the social order. While Priscus as aedile would have been seen in public in his toga praetexta, that was something that could be worn outside the house. Who saw him in his dining slippers, which were important enough for him to include in his tomb? Make sure you have the dining slippers right there in the couch, okay? Maybe this is why Menagenes and Trimalchio in the passages previous are showing off their dining slippers in the public baths. What's the point of dropping 50 denarii, $5,000, on footwear if you can only show them off to a small circle of family, friends, and clients in the private quarters of your dining room? For this reason, I argue for the need to treat shopping practices as a highly visible and meaningful part of the consumption process, since it would have allowed consumers to perform their status and identity for a wider and more diverse public audience that you find in the Roman streets, where you find the Roman shops. So in our time remaining, I want to take a closer look at the design elements in the felt shop of Verecundus to see how they are working to put consumers on display in the shop. In his essay, Walking in the City, Desartaux states that 2D surveys and plans of routes miss what was, the act itself of passing by. This, to me, emphasizes the need to use our bodies as a proxy tool for exploring the ways Roman consumers may have experienced the felt shop, not looking at it as a 2D photo printed on the page of a book, but to actually go there and walk past the shop and in the shop. This shop formed part of a property that was visually distinct from its neighboring buildings. For example, at its eastern end, and you see it highlighted in the yellow, here, and on the plan here, the wall of the neighboring property jutted out, causing the sidewalk to narrow abruptly from 2 meters in front of the felt shop to 1.5 meters. This would have created a choke point, especially on days of heavy traffic. And remember, the Via della Maddonza is the heaviest traffic street in Pompeii, forcing pedestrians to slow down in front of the shop as people navigated their way around the jutting wall and the narrowed sidewalk. Notice that this property had an awning, and it less visible here. It also had a sidewalk that was paved differently from its neighbors with black cocho pesto inlaid with marble chips, a subtle flex for the prosperity of the owner. Marble's expensive. The sidewalk and awning worked in tandem to create what marketing researchers call today a landing strip or a transitional zone in front of the shop. The pavement and the shade from the awning would have created a sudden visual change for the pedestrian that may have caused them, already slowing down because of this choke point in the sidewalk beyond the shop, to stand up and take more notice of their surroundings. Oh, a felt shop. Okay. Mentally and physically preparing them to engage in commercial activity. An investment in the awning may have also served other purposes. It invited pedestrians to stop and linger in front of the shop by offering a dry spot in the rain or a shady spot on a hot day. And if you've ever visited Pompeii in the heat of the summer, then you know that shade is at a premium and that tourists follow that shade around the street. So here is our felt shop on a sunny day, and you'll notice that all the tourists are walking on the other side of the street. Not good for business. The awning may have also worked to enhance the shop's visibility. The Virtual Roman Retail Project has designed historically informed lighting scenarios, which I'm happy to talk more about at the end of this talk. And our purpose for this is to address questions of visibility. How visible was the interior of the space? By virtue of being located on the north side of the street, the shop's front would have received direct sunlight throughout the year, as you can see in the image below. But the sunlight, as you can see from our models here, and we modeled this for a day in August in the 60s CE, the sunlight doesn't penetrate very far within the shop. In fact, it doesn't really reach beyond the threshold. This would have made it difficult for people passing by in the bright sunlight to make out what and who was on display inside the dim interior of the shop. If you've ever walked into a dim room out of the bright sunlight, you know that it takes your eyes a moment to adjust before you can start to see the details in that space. The awning then would have helped adjust the eyes of pedestrians to lower light before they moved in front of the shop's entrance, ensuring maximum visibility for the objects, people, and interactions taking place inside. The shop's facade decor, which we have put back onto the shop, if you go there today, you can't see it, but we have recontextualized it, also suggests that thought was put into positioning the scenes and the decor in relation to moving bodies down the street, with an emphasis on making passersby look into the shop. If you were walking down the street toward the east, within a meter or so of the shop's entrance, you catch an oblique view of the brightly colored frescoes off to your left, with images that appear almost animate or alive through their posture, gesture, and gazes. They beg the viewer to interact with them. I would love to introduce eye tracking into our virtual application to actually see where people look and for how long. But right now I'm working off my own phenomenological experiences. My gaze always follows to Mercury on the top. It's the larger image. Moneybag Mercury purposefully strides out of his shrine toward the shop as if he is about to go shopping. His active body mimics the pedestrian's body in a kinesthetic parallel. You are walking alongside Mercury. Where's Mercury going? Into the shop? Ah, what's in there? His tactile gaze directed at the shop touches the shop entrance, bestowing his protection and his favor over the business. Both Mercury's body and his gaze encourage the consumer to follow him into the shop. And the advertising almost writes itself. Shop like a god at Verecundus. If you look below, that's where my eyes go next, down to the shop scene below the figure of Mercury. You are looking into the shop, not the real shop. You are looking into the 2D fresco of the shop. And I am drawn to the consumer sitting on the bench here and here. This scene prepares me for what I will see when I take 3 more steps and look into the actual shop. Here is the consumer on the bench, and here is an actual consumer on the bench. Again, mentally preparing me for what I am about to see. If you look more closely at the shop scene, you will notice a blue tablecloth that might call to mind, or for me at least it does, the lush blue couch coverings in dining scenes like this fresco of a banquet from Herculaneum. Note the woman sitting on the dining couch. She's in a transparent silk gown, a hairnet, and of course, dining slippers. The legs of the wooden bench on which the consumer sits in the shop remind me of Priscus's dining couch from his tomb, the same innate turned wooden tables that just communicate expense, affluence, elite furnishing and space. By simulating an elite dining room, the scene invites the Epicurean-minded consumer to lounge on the bench in the shop, to try on fancy dining slippers while being served at hand by the shopkeeper. Once inside the shop, the consumer is visible to those on the street. The shop is designed to put the shopper on display. The consumer standing just outside, browsing the goods on the shop counter, would have been highly visible and would have acted to block pedestrian traffic in the street, jamming it up and slowing it down so more people could look. The wide open entrance, which is characteristic of Roman shop architecture, allows pedestrians to view inside the commercial interactions taking place. The bench in the shop is practical. You need to sit down to try on slippers. But it also encourages consumers to stop and stay a while. The longer the consumer lingers, the more likely it is they'll buy something, and the more visible they are to the people passing in the street. Walking west down the street, you are also met with an oblique view of frescoes decorating the other side of the shop's entrance. Here you experience another theophany, Venus Pompeiana, wrapped in a rich blue textile, just like the ones the shopkeeper and consumer wear in the shop scene on the other side. She is flanked by the goddess Fortuna, holding a cornucopia and a rudder, and a Guineus, a protective spirit. Note that the gazes of all 3 deities turn toward the shop, again, touching it with their divine favor and also directing the pedestrian's eyes. What are they looking at? Depicting Venus Pompeiana, the patron deity of Pompeii, might attract local Pompeians, shop local. This store supports Venus Pompeiana, I'm a Pompeian. But taken with the god Mercury on the other side of the entrance, Verecundus, the shop owner, seems to be suggesting that the quality of his clothes are divine. They're good enough for the gods, they're good enough for you. Speaking of Verecundus, he appears below. He seems to step out of the scene and greet the pedestrian on the sidewalk, holding up a toga praetexta, just like the one the Guineus wears above him. And with his frontal pose and open arms, it's almost as he calls to you as you walk by, hey, stop, have a look at this fine toga. For the right price, it could be yours. The products and decor on this shop all indicate that it wanted, I'm not saying it did, but it wanted to target elite consumers. And if we think back to Priscus, who appears in a toga praetexta in his tomb with his dining slippers, he may have bought his goods at this very shop. Although his name does not appear on the electoral slogans on the front of the shop, and so the shop was not supporting his run for office. So maybe he found someplace else and paid to buy his stuff. Back to Memora as we wind down. I want to look again at this passage because I want to think about who else may have shopped at Verecundus' shop. Even if the decor and the design suggest they're catering to elite consumers, does that preclude sub-elite consumers from shopping in this space? Let me read a few passages again to bring back to mind what Mamurra is doing. Where golden Rome rummages among her wealth, Mamurra inspected tender boys, devouring them with his eyes, not the ones exposed in the booths in front, but those kept in reserve. Satiated with looking, he stripped the coverings off round tabletops, demanded the oiled ivory displayed on high shelves. He inquired of his nostrils whether the bronzes really smelt of Corinth. He's critical, Polycletus, of your statues. He complains about the crystals being spoiled with glass. He weighs antique goblets. He counts out green jewels. He sets aside and prices out big jaspers, which means he's haggled over the price. But as he finally left tired out at the 11th hour, he bought 2 wine cups for a copper penny and carried them home himself. Once again, elite author, we're seeing a moralizing tone here as Marshall criticizes the idleness of the sub-elite, a sentiment found in other authors like Juvenal and Lucan. To me, however, this poem also reflects tension and anxiety over the shops and the rise of public consumption, blurring social difference by democratizing leisure and luxury, previously the exclusive purview of the Roman elite. Is Marshall sneering at Mamurra because his shopping habits ultimately reveal that he is an uninformed consumer who thinks he can actually smell Corinth in the bronze, and he can't afford any of these high status goods that he spends all day browsing, and he can't even afford an enslaved porter to carry his cheap wine cups home? Yes, Marshall is absolutely throwing shade at Mamurra. But I would argue that Mamurra and those like him in Roman society, for them, the act of shopping was more important than what they purchased. Roman shops were leisure spaces. And as we see in the felt shop, they were designed to make consuming time, if not actual goods, a pleasurable diversion in which sub-elite groups, like Mamurra, could and did participate. Roman shops were sociable, and every shopping act was a social dance, during which the consumer used resources available within the system, like slippers, to negotiate and renegotiate their relationship with the shopkeeper and with the wider social order. Whether or not a purchase was made, exercising consumer choice and negotiating these commercial exchanges was a form of empowerment, especially for those denied social power. Mamurra, who we believe was formerly enslaved, and so likely himself once an object of exchange, bought and sold in a market, just like the one he visited in the Saipta, now is in control of these commercial interactions. He orders the shopkeepers around. He orders them to bring out items from the back, to pull them down from high shelves. And he inspects them and dismisses them as he likes. Consequently, it's through these exchanges, not the purchase of the object, but the shopping activity, that Mamurra and other sub-elite and marginalized people are able to publicly self-fashion in the shops for a short time as someone of higher status, a different identity, and to experience through these luxury markets and shops the simulated reality that they offer, a small taste of the good life that was promised to them for being part of the Roman Empire. Marshall may see through Mamurra's performance, but clearly many of the shopkeepers who were running around to serve him in the Saipta did not. And I suspect many consumers shopping in the Saipta were also fooled. Hey, check out that Mamurra guy. Look at him. Wow, look at that special treatment he's getting. He must be an important guy. To end, I want to highlight how virtual reality, by helping us visualize, recontextualize, and re-embody these Roman shops, can be an innovative research tool. It's fun, I'll be honest with you, it's a lot of fun, but it can also be a serious research tool for investigating ancient shopping behavior as a meaningful social and cultural practice. And if you want to try it out for yourself after we're done with questions, I'm happy to set it up. That's what I got.
Okay, so we have some time for some questions from anybody here in the audience or online.
Yes.
So in this shop, they would have been helping one customer, whether it was for 20 minutes or 2 hours. And hoping that other people maybe were watching and looking at their products as well as the customer himself. So maybe that was part of it.
Absolutely it was. Most of Roman shopping was a one-on-one service style. And if you had the space, you could have multiple employees behind the shop counter helping to serve multiple customers, but it was always one-on-one, which is very foreign, I think, for us in America today, where we're used to self-service. And where, if you're like me and I walk into a clothing store and I see an employee coming toward me, I'm like, no, just talk to me. Don't say hi to me. But that feels oppressive to me. But for the Romans, it was one-on-one. It was incredibly social. The shopkeeper was attempting to create some sort of social obligation. They were also, through that one-on-one service style, trying to show their knowledge of the product, convince the consumer that this is good quality, that you should buy this, you should trust me. And so, yeah, as they're serving that one customer for 20, 30 minutes, Mamora is like, no, bring out the other slippers, right? I want to try on all the slippers. The other customers are waiting around and seeing him being waited on. And in a town like Pompeii, you might know enough people that you know Mamora doesn't have the funds to buy those slippers. But if it's someone visiting from outside of town, or if you're in a city in Rome where there's 1 million people, you don't know. It's like when I go to the Gucci store in the Via Condotti in Rome, right? I go in, I can't afford it, but they don't know that, right? It's playing, it's performing. Yeah.
Was there a fragmentation between, this is almost like a brick and mortar versus a market kind of thing, and were there days of the week that this kind of a facility would operate and not on other days? So how did they compete for the market space?
It's a great question. So in this period, I want to use a modern term, and I don't want to sound like I'm trying to project back. Omni-channel. I mean, there were multiple different types of consumption spaces in Rome. So they still had the periodic markets and fairs, largely produce based. They had the Macella, the covered market spaces with small stalls. They had streets lined with colonnades with brick and mortar shops. They had theaters where shoppers would set up racks and poles in a sort of temporary street seller style. The Saipta, I imagine, was more of a permanent market space with permanent shop stalls. So somewhere in between that, maybe bazaar style is the way to think of it, but where shoppers would have had a permanent location where you knew you could go back over and over again. And if you again think of my comment on the Via Sacra in the Forum, those were probably permanent retail spaces with high rents where you find all the luxury, like really good luxury stuff there on that. So there's a diversity, and you would have had street hawkers and street traders. And if you were really, really wealthy, maybe they came to you and you didn't go out. But I think if you're going to spend 50 denarii on a pair of slippers, and the standardized shoe sizes don't actually come into being until the Civil War, you got to try them on, right? Or you have to at least have your foot measured in order to get a commission. So that Priscus or whoever is going to go in person. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Okay, questions from the chat. Is there an indication of a wall painting on the other side of Verecundus' shop? So let me go back. So the entrance to the shop, if I can, am I able to flip back through? Yeah, there we go. So the entrance to the shop was decorated on both sides. Let me see if I can find a good example.
Yeah, that one there.
Yeah, that shows it. So either side of the entrance, there were sort of parallel frescoes, a top scene with a deity, Mercury and Venus Pompeiana, and then a lower scene related to the shop floor and the production of the felt products. Because the shop was only partially excavated, we don't know what the interior of the space looked like. So my reconstruction is hypothetical based on the shop scene we find on the front. If we ever got permission to go excavate that shop, we could refine our reconstruction of that interior space. We know, and it is not pictured in my VR application, but I mentioned the programmata, the election slogans. Those were painted over the scenes and in a couple cases over the imagery in the frescoes, almost like a graffito was sprayed on the front of the shop. So yes, there were imagery on both sides, and depending on which direction you're going, up or down the Via da Abundanza, you're gonna have a slightly different encounter, but either way you go, you're gonna see a god, and their postures and gazes are directing you into the shop. Thank you. Yes.
So, these fresco billboards, were they common to all shops? Or was it just like the high-end shops that could afford them?
An excellent question. And again, there's a lot of diversity like there is today in our own shops. So the felt shop of Verecundus, which is attempting to attract an elite clientele, clearly had the capital or the business prosperity to invest some money in the decoration of their facades. We find facade decorations like this on shops in Pompeii and Ostia. So it is a common phenomenon. In addition to the fresco, sometimes you find shop signs like terracotta plaques or stone relief plaques. And so, however, I think as many shops as you have like this, you're gonna find the hole in the wall shop with just a dirt floor and the most basic. So in that sense, there's a way for shopkeepers to differentiate themselves and compete against one another. And I don't have an image of it to share with you, but I mentioned in this block, there's another textile shop a few doors down, and it has a Venus Pompeiana fresco on the shop front that looks almost identical to the one on Verecundus' shop. And there's a question there that Jeremy Hartnett, a scholar, addresses. Are these competing textile Venuses? Which one came first? Was the other one going to outdo the other one with the decor in their shop? Yeah, it's really fun stuff. There's another question in the chat from Andrew who says, are there any descriptions in the Roman world of shops or sellers catering to clients with goods that were meant to imitate expensive goods? Ooh, oh, very good. So we have evidence of forgeries, and so think of like a knockoff Gucci purse. We have evidence of faux terra sigillata ceramics. We have evidence of imitative glassware. And I can't think of a textile example, partly because they're not preserved well in the archaeological record, but we do know that there was an interest in mimicking successful brands by Romans. Can we link that back to a specific shop? Not that I know of at this moment, but the idea is there.
I had a question, sorry. The one thing that struck me about the awning, you mentioned how it would have felt visually, but I was thinking like, if this is kind of an elite shop.
Mm.
And how hot Pompeii gets, is it also like hey, come in here, it's a little bit cooler, it's a way to kind of attract, and could you kind of model temperature differences with shops like this that would have the awnings or not?
That's great. Yes, I absolutely think the awning is an amenity that they're offering their consumers. It's hot, grab a bit of shade, shop for a slipper, or just come in out of the heat and shoot the crap. Tell me about the gossip. Tell me more about this 8 aisle that we're electing, right? That sort of thing. Could we model it? So I have a whole nother lecture that talks about how I'm using this VR app to explore the sensory experiences, and thermoception is a part of that. And so we could toggle on and off this awning and send you all through our app and record your reactions. So if there's an awning, are you more likely to hang out under that shop space in the shade? If we take that awning off and it's really bright and sunny in that virtual space, are you going to move on pretty quickly? So there's a way to play with that. Now, going back to the physical remains, I don't know about temperature, but there has been Vech, who works on acoustic landscapes, who's actually looked at Pompeii and Ostia, and he's looked at Ostian shops and talked about the construction materials and the thickness of the walls and the presence of a portico or a colonnade or awning, and how that's impacting like the reverberation of sounds. And in that other lecture, he estimates in a street like this, the Via da Mendanza, there was about a 40-meter acoustic zone. So basically, if a sound dropped here, you could hear it 40 meters out. So it would fade as it went, right? But you could hear something like that. So I've drawn just really simplistically a acoustic zone around the shop. And then we can go back and say, this is a blacksmith workshop, and this is a tavern. And we can start to think about the sounds that may have occupied those spaces. And we can use a sound artist to start to layer that acoustic landscape together. But temperature would be an interesting one. Yeah.
In terms of luxury goods, what were the norms about women shopping themselves? Would upper class women come out and do their own shopping? Would they send a servant? Would they have the goods brought to themselves to look over?
It's a great question. In Harlow and Lawrence's Cultural History of Shopping and Antiquity, they have a chapter that talks about, who were these shoppers. If you look at the art historical evidence, we find female shopkeepers like this one. I have only ever found one example of a female consumer. And actually, I think I have her here because I just think she's, how do I do it? There we go. I got it. Technology. I do virtual reality, but I can't figure this out. Okay, let me go back. So this is probably from a funerary monument, but represents another shop scene of a textile shop. Yeah, there she is, right there. So this is a sort of temporary textile shop. They're in an arcade or a portico, and they've just set up some railing and they've hung pieces from it. They have a bench. So they're thinking about the comfort of their consumers. And just like our Verecundus is holding up his product, you have the shop employees, more than one here, maybe the main shopkeeper and his enslaved apprentices, who are displaying products for the consumer. Notice that she is veiled and wrapped in a way that suggests a Roman matron, so a Roman of good standing. And next to her and behind her are male, this one in a short tunic, maybe her chaperones. Exactly. So this, again, probably found on a funerary monument, but this message seems to be, we are respectable enough for a Roman woman to shop here. It depends on class. If you were elite, you probably had more restricted movement, and it was more likely that you would bring people to the home. If you were sub-elite, you probably did your own shopping, especially like market products and stuff like that. And some of it probably depended on who controlled the financial, like the purchasing power in a family. If a woman had her own money, she can go buy her own slippers. So yeah, we have some evidence that gets that. I will say there's been, this is I want to do something on spectacle in the shop, because we find, again, I don't want to be too like projecting back, but sports bars sort of decorated with gladiators and wrestlers and athletes. Yeah. And I want to look for evidence of commercial exchange as a sort of struggle, a battle. And when you win it, there's a certain sense of like masculine pride that gets attached to it. Something I'm playing with and exploring. Any other questions?
If there's no other questions, please.
Thank you. If they're interested.
So if anybody's interested, you can try the virtual reality. We have a bit of time still. And just as a reminder, next month we'll be meeting on the third Thursday again. So please come out. Hopefully the weather will be better next time. So thanks everyone for coming out. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really, really interesting.
Thank you.
Really had me thinking some different ideas of some of these places.
Yeah, and
But are the awnings at all? I don't know Pompeii that well. Romano British archaeologist, sorry. Are awnings specifically at certain kinds of shops, like elite shops, or is it a lot of shops have them, or is it because they're on the north side, they have the awnings?
oh yeah,
Like,
that's a good question too. From what I know at Pompeii, and unfortunately, a lot of the second stories are not super well preserved.
right, right.
But what evidence we have, it's not restricted to a certain side of the street, but in Pompeii, each property owner is sort of responsible for their own bench, awning, pavement. So it shows an investment by the property owner to provide those
Okay.
extra amenities. However, and I have a different paper that talks about this, when you get into the imperial period at a place like Ostia, outside of Rome, there are larger urban planning movements to standardize and homogenize the streets, to monumentalize them with arcades,
Yeah,
and to create a sort of standard street front with shops behind them.
okay.
And so then the individual awnings disappear and you have these like monumental brick and concrete arcades
Right.
that create these shopping arcades, basically, right?
Interesting.
So it sort of depends on, some of it is chronological, some of it is probably
Yeah.
like traditions within the town.
Got it.
But in Pompeii, in that period, a lot of it is what the property owner wants.
I'm gonna stop asking you questions. I think I'm gonna try it then. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you are task and treated, throw the shoes around.